Hi everybody, my name's Ian. I assume that most of us are aware, to some degree, how differently we feel if we are walking through a botanical garden versus a busy city intersection. Most people intuitively feel that nature is relaxing, but social psychologists are interested in understanding the functions behind how environments influence behavior. The title of the research article I selected is Passive Green Space Exposure Leading to Lower Aggression, the Mediating Role of Sense of Control. This study explores this idea by asking a simple but interesting question: can exposure to green spaces reduce aggression? The research in this study tested whether passive exposure to green spaces, things like seeing trees, grass, or parks, can reduce aggressive behavior by increasing a person's sense of control. The researchers predicted something called a mediating relationship. They believe that green space doesn't just directly reduce aggression. Instead, they believe that it works through another psychological factor: sense of control. In other words, exposure to green spaces increases a sense of control, which then lowers aggression. The researchers conducted two studies. In the first study, about 240 participants were asked how much green space they're exposed to in their daily life, their sense of personal control, and their levels of aggressive tendencies. The second study used a more controlled experimental method in which 260 participants were randomly assigned to view different environments. Some participants saw green natural scenes, while others saw more urban environments. Because participants were randomly assigned, the researchers could better examine causality and cause and effect relationship. The result from both studies showed a similar pattern. People who were exposed to more green environments showed lower levels of aggression and higher levels of sense of control, and that sense of control acted as a mediator between green space exposure and aggression. This aligns with social psychology research, showing that behavior is strongly influenced by situational determinants, not just personality traits, and that our environment plays a direct role in the situational determinants of aggression. Furthermore, this evidence highlights the impact of green spaces on our construal processes and our automatic processing, which determines how people interpret situations. If people feel more in control in natural environments, they may interpret stressful situations as less threatening, which could reduce aggressive reactions. This lines up with the theories proposed by the general aggression model, particularly how the environmental modifiers of distal processes can affect aggression. Our textbook references a study conducted in Chicago by Ida Wells, where she found lower levels of crime near apartments surrounded by green spaces. Charles Bronis conducted a similar experiment in Philadelphia in 2018, where a 22% reduction in burglary and a 29% reduction in gun violence was measured near lots that had been cleaned and planted with greenery. Like most research, this study has some limitations to consider. Some of the measures relied on self-reporting and could be influenced by self-monitoring, which means that participants might not always accurately describe their behavior and emotions. The study implemented the use of a Likert scale to help increase the accuracy and validity of their self-reporting. Cultural factors may influence how people respond to green spaces, so the results may not generalize equally across all societies. For example, in Western countries characterized by independent cultures with individualistic values, a strong sense of control is often linked to greater happiness and health. In contrast, in collectivist cultures with interdependent cultures, the impact of sense of control tends to be less pronounced. The participants from this study were mostly from China, which generally has a more collectivist culture. Given the complexity of these cultural nuances, it is crucial for future research to engage in multi-country studies that cover a broad spectrum of cultural values. Finally, other factors might help explain the effect. For example, green spaces might reduce stress, improve mood, or increase feelings of relaxation, which could also influence aggression. These examples that I listed could be considered other examples of a mediating relationship, or they could be considered qualitative extensions of a person's sense of control. Further clarification would be helpful. The most interesting part of the study is how it applies to real life. If green environments reduce aggression, this could have major implications for urban design and public health across virtually every facet of society. City planners and residential developers might reduce aggressive behavior by adding more parks, trees, and green walking spaces within cities and neighborhoods. Schools and universities could increase green spaces to help reduce conflict, stress, and aggressive behavior among students. Workplaces might apply this research by adding natural elements to help employees feel calmer, more in control, and ideally more productive. Therapists and mental health professionals could implement this research when providing services related to stress or anger management. Community organizations aimed at reducing violence could use this research to target communities prone to higher levels of violence. Prisons and correctional facilities could reduce violence among inmates and guards through applications of these studies. Hospitals and healthcare facilities could improve emotional well-being for patients and staff. These ideas connect to social psychology's focus on situational determinants and influences on behavior. Instead of trying to change people directly, we can sometimes improve behavior by changing the environments around them. For individuals, this study suggests something simple but powerful. Spending time around nature might help regulate emotions and reduce stress. And from a social psychology perspective, this reminds us that our behavior is shaped by the interactions between people and their environments. Something as simple as seeing trees or greenery might reduce how we feel and even how we treat other people. Lastly, I've provided the page numbers and for my terms and references in the text of my speech, and I included the URL link for the textbook since the browser I use has different page numbers than the regular textbook. Thank you.